Okay. Okay, thanks for joining to this webinar. Today, we're going to talk about how to integrate your shares with Ntfs permissions in FileCloud. And there are a few things that we need to know before actually connecting or getting this ready with FileCloud system. And one of the benefits that FileCloud brings into your environment is that if you already have Windows network shares, you can integrate them directly with FileCloud. You don't have to use only managed storage. You can actually bring any Windows network shares that you have with or without Ntfs permissions, and you can add them to the system and be able to integrate here. Before integrating in network shares, if they are going to be using Ntfs permissions, one of the things that you need to know is that the Windows service for FileCloud has to be running with a service account that has Ntfs permission access, right? So just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. Okay. Please, if something doesn't show up on the screen directly when I'm doing it here, just let me know, okay? Okay, so this is your FileCloud server that you have running directly on your system. One of the things that I'm just mentioning here as a prerequisite to be able to get the FileCloud system to read all your Ntfs tables is that the web server, the service that runs as the web server, has to be running with a service account that can read the Ntfs table. So what do I mean by that? So let's bring up the services here. Okay, so this is the Apache service. And as you can see here, this has to be running not with the local account, but with an account that is able to read the network share. Okay, so that's the most important prerequisite to be able to read the Ntfs table and be able to grant or deny access directly to your users. Okay, that's the most important thing. Okay, and how do you integrate actually that to the system? That's very, very simple from here. We can go here. Okay, let's go into your admin UI. Okay, and here you will have your network shares, right? Admin UI, network shares, and you can see here which one actually are using Ntfs tables. So you can see here that we have a network share with a default permission. We can see here that we have also a network share with default permissions, and there are two permissions that we're working on here, right? We have default. Default is that you have access directly to your network share, but you're not reading the Ntfs permissions. And we have the option to do Ntfs table. So just to give you an idea, if I wanted to add a new one, okay, we can do something like test network share. Then here, we're going to have the option to do normal mount and smart mount. Okay, so these two mounts have one big difference. The normal mount, and I can show you here directly on the folders. What does that mean, right? So in the normal mount, we have something like this. Normal folder. Okay, and we can do something like this. Test folder aside. Okay, in the normal mount, there are no permissions associated. We can do let's go back here. Okay, and we can do the used assign permissions. Okay, let's just create that so you can see the difference. Let's add groups here. Okay, and you will see here the biggest difference. Whenever you add in network shares with the default permissions, you can do either full access or read access. Okay, we finish. But if we want a network share permission, that's something on your local network. Okay, let's do it here. We're going to do, oh, we already have one here, Ntfs. Okay, and now I bring any user or any group, you're going to see the difference here. It is going to be using the Ntfs permissions. So if the user has Ntfs access to that, it will grant it. If the user doesn't, it will not. So let's take a quick look here, for example, to this Ntfs test folder. You will see that in the security, whichever user has read, write, and all the permissions here, it will be able to have all those permissions in the system. If the user doesn't, it will fail. Okay, so well, that's what we were talking before. Anything that you already have existing in your network, in your Windows network shares, you will be able to grant access and to give access like this. Now, there is another type of folder that you are able to use here in your system, and that is a smart mount. So let me kick you out here. Okay, let's go first to the user section so you know what I'm talking about. So you can see here, for example, that every user has a username associated. Okay, even if you have network shares, many times you're going to have a Windows home folder, right? The Windows home folder is that, let's say you have a system or a Windows server that your users are going to access, and every user has its own home folder, and that home folder is associated to the name. So let's say we have something like this. Smart folder. And in here, I'm going to have each user is going to have a folder. Daniel. Let's see, let's add another one. And I'm going to add something here. Just something so it's not empty. Yes. So now if I go to create a network folder using this folder here, you have the following options. So let's go back to network folders. This is, we're going to call it smart sort testing. This is going to be a smart mount. Okay, so you see here, even in the example, it goes to show you something different. And you can, each folder identify it using either the user ID, the email ID, or the display name. So if you have something as we did right now, we will do something like percentage, user ID, percentage. Next, no Ntfs permission needed because it's going to show only the folder that belongs to that user and it's going to ignore everything else. Okay, I'm going to give him full access. And I'm going to add everything here. Let's see. Oh, we already have everyone. Okay. So now you see, we just created 3 different additional folders to the ones that I already have. We have test network share, test FileCloud, and smart. If we actually want to see how that looks on the other side, this is what we do. Okay, so we have our network folders section here. If we go to the first folder that we created, okay, we have our test folder there. If we actually go to the one with Ntfs permissions, if the user doesn't have any access to any file in that folder, and you can see that my name doesn't have access to anything there. Let's go there. Test security. You will see here that Daniel doesn't have access to this network share, right? So that's going to fail for showing any folders or anything here. And it's not going to allow me as well to create anything on the web UI or to read anything from the network share. If I go to the smart mount, it will go directly to the test file that I created, right? So it doesn't even identify any other folder from any other user. So it obfuscates pretty well all your other user files. It works exactly as you have the folders in your network shares. Okay. So that's another way to doing the folder differentiation, even if you don't have Ntfs permissions in place. So keep that in mind, that you can do anything like that, and you don't even need Ntfs permissions to accomplish it. Okay. Now there are other ways that here that we have to work out on the network shares. The network shares have other permissions, as you saw when we created them, right? Once the network share is ready, you can give and remove some other options here. What does all those other checkboxes mean? Smart mount, you already see that what we're actually using it's differentiating a folder from another user. We can disable sync, right? So if you have your network shares, you want to allow some of them to be used by sync app to synchronize down the files, or you can disable and only do web access or FileCloud Drive access. You can enable or disable the sync option. You can disable notifications, right? That's when you're actually making you're sharing, let's say you're sharing a folder with a group of 10 users from your company. Every time one of those 10 users on your company makes a change, adds a file or removes a file, something like that, you're going to get a notification email. So you can disable that as well. You can allow shares, allow private shares, or no shares allowed. What do we mean by this? If I go here to my network shares, and right now you can see it, I have it as allow all shares. I can go to any of the folders, any of my system, and I can actually share to the outside world, right? It can be a full share to everyone, or you can allow a selected group of people to access it. And if you don't want that, let's remove this share. Let's say it's an important accounting folder in your network share. And specifically on that folder, you don't want to allow shares to go outside, right? Shares are going to be only allowed in between the users. You can say here, okay, only private shares. And I update that permission. If I go back again here, refresh, and I want to make a share from this, okay, let me do something here because it's cached, so we have to do a hard refresh. There we go. I remove the share, and I want to share it again. Okay, it's only going to allow me to do it to the users that are already existing on the system, and it's not going to be able to share it to the outside, right? So that's a big difference here. Or I can disable shares directly to anyone else here. So I can go here, edit permissions, and all the shares are not going to be permitted. Okay, so if I go back again, you will see that the share button disappeared from the options. Okay, so that's what that permission is going to allow to you to do. Share internally only, or not, no shares at all. Okay, and you can do other things. Let's say you have a folder that you want people to access, and they can even download via sync. But besides they can download via sync, you don't want to allow them to delete files. It could be a resource folder, for example, for your web design team, or it can be something for accounting or something like that. And you don't want them to delete. If they accidentally remove a file from their folder, you can allow or not allow files to be removed via offline sync. Right? They can still remove the files from the web UI, but that doesn't mean that they can delete the files via the sync application. Okay, that's one of the other options. Now there are other options here. We have the real-time indexing and the reindex button. And what this basically means is if you have content here that you want to be indexed to be able to be used on the search functionality by the content, you can allow or disallow it. To make this possible, you can see here that you have another service called FileCloud Helper. The FileCloud Helper here, you can see it here as well. FileCloud Helper. Okay, this is going to be running in the background. And what this service is going to be constantly using is it actually uses this Solar. Solar is a third-party component that is going to be reading the content of each of the files on those network shares or in your managed storage. And it's going to allow you to do a content file search. Some of the limitations are the files have to be less than 10 megabytes. And it's going to allow that anything that you have like an Excel, PDF, text file, Word document that can be accessed and has the ability to be read on the content, it's going to be allowed to be searched as a content search, right? So that's one of the benefits and one of the reasons the FileCloud Helper service exists. Okay. Okay, and we already checked the Apache service. Enabling FileCloud Helper is basically, as I just mentioned, just start a helper. once the helper is started, there are a few things that you need to know, right? Before once that's started, you will have here to come and enable the index option. Okay, once the index section is started and I update this permission, there is the option that we have to restart this, right? So let's do something here. Let's, you see this message that I got that says, cannot enable real-time indexing from smart mounts. That's because smart mounts doesn't have that option, but we can do it on any other folder, right? So we can enable here. I'm going to update. And you'll see what I just mentioned, it's always going to show you here directly. Make sure the helper service with real-time index enabled is installed and running. Restarting the helper is required when indexes is enabled or disabled. So every time I go here and I enable content search on one of the network share folders, I simply have to go to my control panel, stop the helper service, and start it again. Okay, and then it's going to start, first of all, indexing all of the files inside that folder, and that will allow the content search to be working on that specific folder for future on. Okay, so we have now covered what the network shares are, how you include them in the system, what are the different types, smart mount, normal mount, normal mount with or without Ntfs permissions, how you enable the options, the advanced options on those network shares, how do you enable the helper. The Apache service, as I mentioned, it has to be running with an account that has full access on the network shares to be able to read them. And this is not 100, if you're never going to use Ntfs, you don't need this. If you're going to say use, for example, smart mounts, and those smart mounts don't require Ntfs, the Apache service can run with the local account as long as the system has access to the network, right? And there are a couple of limitations that are important that you know here. So let's say you have a network folder that has more than 150,000, or between 150,000 or 200,000 files. On those network shares, you cannot enable the real-time indexing or the content search. The reason behind this is because at the moment, it's a limitation of the file system itself, right? Whenever you want to try to enable it, it will take a long time to finish indexing those files, more than 30 minutes. Then the next time that it will have to index again, it hasn't even finished, right? So you will never are going to be able to complete the indexing of those files. So that's important to know. And another thing is that it's not the same as the managed storage, right? It's not a limitation, but it's something that you want to consider. Anything that they have to make changes, if they don't do changes, let's say your users want to use FileCloud to access the network shares outside your company, but inside your company, you actually have their computers accessing directly the network share folder, and they make changes to those files. All those changes are going to be outside of our system, right? So there is no way for the FileCloud to know if the file was edited, if the file was uploaded, removed. There is no record of that information in the FileCloud system. So if we want to go to the audit records in the admin UI, you're going to be missing that information. Okay, and another thing is that any changes that they make directly, and another user, let's say you're using FileCloud Drive and you want to use the lock functionality so no one else opens it. If someone else directly opens it from the network folder, we will not be able to lock it down to the rest of the team. So that's something that you want to consider. But the main idea here is that you can have your FileCloud system work here like a gateway, so people can access the file directly from the outside. And as you can see, and no files are actually being stored in FileCloud on the managed storage. It's actually just accessing, right? And right now, for testing purpose, we have it all on this on the same folder, on the same machine, right? On a temporary storage drive on the same computer. But your network folder can be on a totally different computer and just access it by / your network folder and anything else that you want. And the files don't have to be on the same machine or virtual machine as your FileCloud system is running. Okay, that's all I have for today. I don't know if you have any questions that you would like to ask. We can open a Q&A right now. Okay, Prokop, what do you mean by external rule engine? Okay, so in case I don't understand here your question, Prokop, by external rule engine, if you are talking, for example, from a Linux perspective, and something like CentOS or Red Hat, those permissions are currently not possible to do directly. We have been experimenting with rule engines before, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So officially, we don't say we support them. It's actually mostly test and trial and error that we can help do with you, but we haven't actually completed the test that we can see if that's going to work. Okay. Any other question? Okay, so you say that you like to use your Active Directory as source of requests for creating folders, sharing permissions, etc. Okay, so this is a good question. Everything that we do here on network shares, if I want to create a folder, let's say I want to go directly on the web again, and I want to create a folder here. Let's log in. Okay, if I want to do another folder here or create a file or move a new file, all those permissions are going to be verified via your Ntfs table. Your Ntfs table is mandated by your Active Directory, right? So whatever permissions are granted or not granted on AD, it's going to actually do exactly the same thing on FileCloud. We're going to follow whatever your AD is saying that the user has access to. Let me know if that answers your question. Okay, okay, from client side. So just following up here. Yeah, no Linux. Okay, so let me do something here. Okay, so let's, okay, AD source, we went to that. Yeah, no Linux. Okay, so request will come from the rule engine from the client side. Okay. What do you mean from the client side here? So if you are referring from the client side directly, that is all the access that you get from outside, let's say you're using a client application like Sync or Drive, all those are going to follow anything that is actually directly the same thing from AD, right? Whatever AD gives. Okay, employer, yes, employee. Yeah, whatever the user has externally, if you have sync enabled on those folders, even if they have access directly on their computer as a sync folder, we're going to do whatever the NTFS folder table has directly from Active Directory, and there's no way around it, right? We can save the file locally on the computer and just put it there, but we will not sync up, right? It will just ignore it and say, okay, this user doesn't have access to create that, and those folders are not even going to be available for sync for him because it doesn't have access, right? It has to have read and write to be able to accomplish that. And anything that you have read and write as a user, it doesn't matter any other thing, right? It's one thing that you want to know is that maybe I didn't mention before is that the permissions on the NTFS have to be security permissions. They cannot be sharing permissions. Those special permissions are not available via the API from NTFS, so that's why we don't read them. But it has to be a security permission. Okay, hope that answers your question, Prokop. Okay, any other questions? Okay, thanks, Prokop, for your question. Okay, if there's anything else, I think that's all for today. I really appreciate everyone from joining, and we'll be here the next time to help you out to understand other features and other things that you can do with FileCloud. Have a great day. If you have any questions, just let us know. You can just email support and we'll be here to help you out. Okay. Oh, I have two questions. I would like to hide a network share that users don't have access to. Okay, in that matter, by hide, I would like to understand what hide means, right? But normally, if you don't have access to a folder, we will not be able to read it. I'm guessing you're referring to what we saw here directly, right? I have the network share, I have the test folder, test FileCloud folder, right? But I don't have access to that folder, right? And I get file listing. Is this what you're referring to? I think that's what you're referring to. That one, the only way to actually hide it from the listing from network shares is if you do something like, okay, instead of hiding or giving access to everyone, let me do something here. I can go into the network folders. And instead of adding everyone to the folder, right? That means in the access permission, we can, instead of doing this, add only, let's say let's add just the marketing is the only one that's going to have access to this folder. Okay, like this. And I update it. If I go back to the web UI and refresh, I don't see that folder anymore. That's the only way of hiding it, right? Not giving access to the user back directly from the admin UI. Okay, I hope that answers your question. And thanks, Gil, for your question. What is the ideal platform and infrastructure to achieve optimum performance in an NTFS environment? Okay, so one thing that you want to be sure is for the best performance possible, if you're using, for example, security zones, first of all, your FileCloud server and your NTFS server should be on the same zone, right? They should be accessible between each other in the fastest possible in the network. It will become very difficult for FileCloud to perform really well if the network shares are actually in a long distance or have a lot of jumps that have to happen for the FileCloud to be able to access those files, right? So that's something you want to be sure. Another thing that you have to know is that, let's say you have network shares and the folders in the network shares have thousands of files, but those files are not inside subfolders, right? It's just a big chunk folder, let's say with 5,000 files. And you want your users to have FileCloud Drive app running. Every time they go to the FileCloud Drive and the listing has to happen for those 5,000 files, it's going to fail, right? That's something that you want to avoid. The best option there is if you still want to give them access, just divide those thousands of files in a few subfolders, right? Try to get the listing to hundreds instead of thousands. That way, if you're actually going to be using Drive as your access, you're going to have a better performance for your user instead of just loading and failing every single time. If you're going to give them access only through the web UI, one of the benefits is that the web UI has actually listing, right? And it will give you here, if I go to the test network share, it will show me only the first 10 items, 20 items, and then I have to do pagination, right? I will move again to the next page and the next page, and it doesn't have to worry about bringing or trying to load all the file listing. And in the web UI, there's another caveat, right? If you have thousands of files listing here and you want to preview images, let's say it's an images folder, it will take forever for all those thumbnails to show up. And sometimes the thumb service, the doc preview service that runs in the background that gives you permissions to do that, it will fail and it will not even load the preview images in here, right? So that's one thing that you want to avoid by having a good subfolder infrastructure and keep it in the hundreds instead of thousands in each of the subfolders. I hope that answered your question, Hill. Okay. I think that's all we have for today. And I think there are no more questions. Again, if you have more questions, you send it over to us at support@codelab.com, and we'll be sure to answer it as soon as possible. Thanks everyone for your time today. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Okay, closing the session today.